The carriage stopped at the end of a gravel path that had not been raked in what looked like several seasons, and Louisa Harte stepped out alone, without anyone to take her hand. The driver set her trunk on the ground without a word. He did not look at her when she thanked him. He was already climbing back to his seat before she had finished the sentence, and within moments the wheels were crunching back down the lane toward the main road, and she was standing in front of a house she had never seen before, in a county she had visited only once as a child, married to a man who had not come with her. She did not cry. She had decided that on the train north from Halifax, somewhere between the second and third hour, with her gloves folded in her lap and the window showing nothing but gray November fields, there was no sense in crying. She had known what this marriage was when she agreed to it. The house was called Greyfield. It sat at the end of the lane like something that had been waiting a long time for a reason to matter again. 3 stories of stone, a wide front entrance with the paint on the door gone to flaking, a row of windows on the upper floor where 2 of the curtains hung crooked. The garden at the front had been left to do as it pleased. Rose bushes had grown into arches that nobody had trimmed. The boxwood hedges had long since lost their shape. Mrs. Polly Crane met her at the door. She was 60 or near it, with a broad face and the careful expression of a woman who had learned not to expect things. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, "we've been expecting you." "I'm Crane. I've been keeping the house." "Thank you," Louisa said. "I'm glad someone has." Mrs. Crane let that pass without comment and led her inside. The entrance hall smelled of cold stone and something else, a faint damp underneath, the kind that settles into a house when the fires aren't lit often enough. The floors were clean, but the rugs had not been beaten recently. A painting on the staircase wall had developed a lean to the left that suggested the nail was losing its grip on the plaster. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," Mrs. Crane said. "East-facing. Gets the light in the morning. How many staff are there?" Mrs. Crane paused on the stairs. "At present, myself, and a young man named Douglas who does the heavy work. He's in twice a week, sometimes 3 times if there's enough to justify it. 2 people for a house of this size." Louisa looked at the dust on the banister rail and did not comment on it. "And Mr. Ashworth?" she asked. "Will he be joining us?" "He's in Edinburgh," Mrs. Crane said. "Business. He said to tell you he'd be back when he could." He had not said this to Louisa. He had said nothing to Louisa since the wedding except to wish her a safe journey. "Right," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Crane." Her room was adequate. The bed was made with clean sheets. The window looked east as promised, and someone had put a small vase of dried lavender on the windowsill. Louisa did not know if it had been there for years or placed there fresh. It didn't seem important to ask. She unpacked her own trunk. She hung her dresses, put her books on the shelf, set her writing case on the desk near the window. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room for a long time. She was 24 years old. She had grown up in a well-ordered home in Toronto where her father kept meticulous accounts, and she had learned from him what most women of her acquaintance had not: that a ledger told a more honest story than any conversation. She had spent 5 years assisting him before his health declined, and she knew the difference between a household that was managed and one that was merely running on the memory of management. Greyfield was the second kind. She would start in the morning. The kitchen garden was the first thing she walked in the daylight. Mrs. Crane watched her from the back door, with an expression that was somewhere between caution and relief, as if she had hoped someone would do this, but had not expected it to be the new mistress. The kitchen garden had a fence that needed mending on the north side. The beds had been planted at some point. She could see the old rows, but they'd been let go. The raspberry canes were a tangle. The soil in the vegetable beds was hard and gray with neglect. "What did it used to produce?" Louisa asked. Mrs. Crane came down the 3 steps from the door. "When Miss Ashworth the elder was alive, it fed the whole house and then some. She was particular about it." "His mother?" "Yes. She died 4 years ago." Mrs. Crane paused. "Things changed after." Louisa looked at the canes. "I'll need some tools, and I'll need to speak with Douglas when he's next in." "He's in Thursday." "Good, Thursday then." She did not say anything more about it. She went back inside and asked Mrs. Crane to show her the household accounts. It took Mrs. Crane a moment before she answered. "I've done my best with them." "I'm sure you have," Louisa said. "I'd still like to see them." The household accounts were kept in a wooden box in the kitchen, which was itself a statement. They were written in Mrs. Crane's careful hand, and they were honest as far as they went. But they did not go very far. Expenses for coal, for basic provisions, for Douglas's wages. A quarterly payment made out to Harcastle and Fenwick, land agents, for estate management services, recorded without comment. Louisa looked at the figure. She looked at it again. "This is the estate management fee?" she asked. Yes, Mr. Ashworth's solicitor set it up. It's been paid quarterly since before I arrived. Since before you arrived, Louisa repeated. How long have you been here? 6 years. She wrote the figure down in her own notebook and said nothing else about it. That evening she sat at the desk in her room and worked through what she knew. She was working from memory, and from 3 months of accounts, which was not enough to see clearly, but she could see the shape of things. The land around Greyfield was not large, but it was not small. There were tenant farmers on the east fields. She had seen the outbuildings from the upstairs window. She had not yet found a record of what they paid in rent. She wrote, "Where does the rent go?" She underlined it. Douglas turned out to be a young man of about 20, with red hands and a steady manner. He had been working the ground since he was 17, and he knew the property the way people know things they have learned out of necessity rather than interest. He told her what she asked and did not volunteer what she didn't. The East tenants, she said. Farrow and the others. Do you know them? Aye. Farrow's been on that land since before the old Mr. Ashworth. The other 2 lots have turned over once or twice. And the rent comes in how? To whom? Douglas looked at her steadily. To Hardcastle and Fenwick, far as I know. That's who they pay. And from there to the estate accounts? I wouldn't know about that, ma'am. She thanked him and went inside. She wrote 2 letters that afternoon. The first was to her father's former solicitor in Toronto, a man named Mr. Graves who had helped settle her father's affairs and who she trusted to be discreet. She asked him what the going management rate was for a rural estate of Greyfield's type and size. The second was to the office of Hardcastle and Fenwick in Halifax, requesting a summary of services rendered and funds received on behalf of the Ashworth estate for the past 3 years. She expected the first reply in 2 weeks. She expected the second might take longer, or might not come at all. She sent both letters, and then went to look at the kitchen garden again in the fading afternoon light. It had better bones than she'd first given it credit for. Mr. Ashworth came back not in weeks, but in 10 days, and without warning. Louisa was in the garden when she heard the carriage, her gloves dirty at the fingertips, and her hair less tidy than she would have preferred. She did not hurry inside to change. There seemed little point in performing a version of herself she hadn't been asked to perform. She heard the front door, and then she heard Mrs. Crane's voice, and then nothing for a long while. She was kneeling at the far bed, working around the base of an old lavender plant that might still be salvageable, when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. She stood before she turned. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps the house behind him made him seem so. Oliver Ashworth was 31, with dark eyes that held the particular quality of a man who had learned to keep his reactions somewhere below the surface. He looked at her gloves, at the turned earth, at the tools laid out beside the bed, and his expression was careful, not unkind. But careful. Mrs. Ashworth, he said. Mr. Ashworth. She pulled off one glove. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't know I was coming until yesterday. He looked at the bed she'd been working. You've been busy. There was work to do. He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the old rose bushes at the perimeter and made a dry sound in the canes. I should have written, he said, to tell you what to expect. Mrs. Crane managed the introduction. That isn't what I meant. He looked at her steadily. I mean, I should have been clearer. Before. She waited. My circumstances are not simple, he said. I thought, when the arrangement was made, that I could manage both the Edinburgh work and the estate. I've found that I cannot. Not adequately. He stopped. You were not brought here to manage the estate. I understand that. I intend to make proper arrangements. I've already begun, she said. He looked at her. The garden, she said. The accounts. I've written to the land agents requesting a full accounting. Something moved behind his eyes. It was not the reaction she expected, which would have been either gratitude or displeasure. It was something closer to wariness. You've written to Hardcastle and Fenwick. Yes. Was that wrong? He was quiet again for a moment longer than felt comfortable. No, he said. No, that was not wrong. He looked away from her, across the garden. I'll be here for a week. Good, she said. I have questions. He turned back to look at her. Again that quality of controlled surprise. About the estate accounts, she said. When you have time. Tomorrow morning, he said, and went inside. She did not sleep well that night, but she never had in a new place. She lay in the east-facing room and listened to the house settle around her, the old pipes, and the quiet groan of the floorboards adjusting to the cold, and she thought about the quarterly payment, and the missing rent income and the word management, that could mean so many things depending on who was using it. Her father had told her once that the most common theft in a business was not dramatic. It was not embezzlement in a ledger, with false names and impossible figures. It was simply the slow, quiet assumption that nobody was watching closely enough to notice. A fee set too high and never reviewed. A payment routed the long way around. A figure that was accurate but incomplete. She thought about Hardcastle and Fenwick, and she thought about the 6 years Mrs. Crane had been keeping accounts in a wooden box in the kitchen. 6 years without anyone reviewing them. She got up before the sun was fully over the hill and went to her desk and wrote down everything she knew in columns, the way her father had taught her. Facts on one side, questions on the other. She filled 3 pages before Mrs. Crane brought up a breakfast tray at 7:30. Mr. Ashworth met her in the library at 9. He had the manner of a man who had agreed to something he wasn't fully certain about, but had decided to see through. She put her notebook on the desk between them and opened it to the column of figures. "The quarterly management fee," she said. "It's paid to Hardcastle and Fenwick. That much is in the household accounts. But I can find no corresponding record of what they collect on behalf of the estate. There are 3 tenant farms on the East Fields. I don't see rent receipts anywhere." He looked at her notebook, then he looked up. "Those receipts should have been going to Fenwick," he said. "To be disbursed net of fees." "Disbursed to where?" He was quiet. "Mr. Ashworth," she said. "I'm not asking to be difficult. I'm asking because if the rents are being disbursed to an account I don't have access to, I need to know where to look." "They should have been coming here," he said. "To the estate, to the household running account." She looked at him steadily. "They are not in the household running account." He sat back in his chair. Outside the window, the early light was hitting the frost on the garden beds, and it threw a thin cold brightness across the room. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know yet. I asked Mr. Graves, a solicitor in Toronto, my father's man, to advise me on the proper rate for a management fee of this kind. If the rate Hardcastle and Fenwick are charging is already higher than the going rate, that's one thing. If the rate is standard but the disbursements aren't coming through, that's another. And if it's both, then we'll know that too." He stood up and walked to the window and looked at the garden for a long moment, with his hands behind his back. "I was not paying attention," he said finally. "After my mother died, I was not. I let things run on their own because it was easier. I knew there was a problem with the finances, but I assumed it was my own management. My absence. It may still partly be that," she said. "I'm not drawing conclusions yet." He turned from the window. The expression on his face was something she didn't have a category for yet. It was not humility exactly. It was something harder to name, a quality that came from finding that someone had looked at the thing you'd been afraid to look at, and had looked at it without flinching. "Continue," he said. "I'll write to Fenwick's office myself. Today, I've already written." He nodded. "Then we'll see what they say." Fenwick's reply came in 3 weeks. Mr. Graves's letter arrived in just under 2. She read Mr. Graves's first, at her desk, with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. He confirmed what she had suspected. The going rate for management of a rural estate of Greyfield's size and character was between 5 and 7% of annual rent collected. The rate being charged by Hardcastle and Fenwick, as listed in the household accounts, was 14%. More than twice. She set the letter down. She picked up her tea, found it cold, and drank it anyway. Fenwick's letter, when she opened it, was a thing of careful evasion. It acknowledged her inquiry, explained that accounts were handled by their senior partner, Mr. Hardcastle, who was unfortunately abroad at present, and promised that a full accounting would be provided upon his return, which was expected in 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. She read the letter again. Then she wrote 3 responses in a single afternoon. The first was to Fenwick's office, acknowledging their letter, and noting that she would expect the full accounting within 14 days, not 6 to 8 weeks, and that she was writing simultaneously to the 3 tenant farmers on the East Fields to request their own records of payments made. The second was to Farrow, and to the other 2 tenants, Haggart and Birch, asking them to confirm in writing the amounts they had paid in rent over the past 3 fiscal years, and to whom, and by what means. The third was to Mr. Graves, asking him whether what she was describing constituted grounds for a formal complaint to the relevant authority, and if so, which authority that would be. She sealed all 3 envelopes before she could second-guess herself, and went down to ask Douglas to take them to the post the following morning. Oliver Ashworth had gone back to Edinburgh by then. He had been at Greyfield for 8 days in the end, and on the last 2 days he had spent an hour each morning in the library with her, going through the papers she'd gathered, adding what he knew. He was a careful man. She had decided that much. Not cold, as she had first thought, but careful. The way a person gets careful when they have been careless once in a way that cost them. She did not know yet what had cost him. She knew it had something to do with his first wife. She knew it was not her business to ask. Before he left, he stopped at the door of the library and said, "The lavender on the south bed, is it worth keeping?" "Most of it," she said. "The plants at the west end are too far gone, but the rest will come through with some work." He looked at her for a moment. "My mother planted those 15 years ago." "Then it's worth the work," she said. He nodded and left. She went back to her notebook and did not examine what she was feeling too closely. The replies from the tenants came in one by one over the following week and a half. Farrow wrote in a large clear hand, direct and specific, with figures she could read at a glance. The amounts he had paid, the dates, and the name on the receipt he'd been given each time. Harcastle and Fenwick, land agents. The amounts he had been paying were exactly the amounts she'd expected. The amounts that should have been flowing back to the estate, minus any legitimate management fee, were not anywhere in the household accounts. 3 years of rental income. Not all of it, she suspected. Something must have trickled through, enough to make things look normal to someone who wasn't watching closely. But a significant portion had gone somewhere other than where it was supposed to go. She wrote it all out in a clear table. Facts, figures, dates. She sent the table to Mr. Graves and asked him to review it. His reply came within 10 days. He was gentle about it, which meant he was certain. What she had described, he wrote, appeared to meet the threshold for a formal complaint of misappropriation of estate funds to the provincial authorities. He recommended she retain a local solicitor before proceeding, and offered to recommend someone in Halifax with experience in these matters. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she wrote to Oliver. She laid it out in the same plain language she'd been using throughout. Figures, dates, the sequence of events, what she had done and what she believed it showed. She was not dramatic about it. She told him what there was to tell, what she recommended as next steps, and she closed by saying she would act only on his instruction. She sealed the letter. She looked at it. She added a postscript. "I have also ordered new soil for the south garden beds. The lavender will need it. I'll have Douglas start on that side next week." She didn't analyze why she added it. It was simply true, and it seemed right to say. He came back on a Thursday, which was not when she expected him. She was in the library when she heard the door, and then his boots on the floor of the hall, and then Mrs. Crane's voice saying something she couldn't make out. When he came into the library, he looked different from when he'd left. She could not identify what had changed in his face exactly. Something had come loose. He sat down across the desk from her without saying anything for a moment. "I hired Mr. Graves's recommendation," he said, "solicitor in Halifax. He's filing the complaint next week." "Good," she said. "He thinks there's enough to pursue recovery." "That depends on how the investigation goes, but he's optimistic." "Good." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the afternoon had gone soft and gray the way November afternoons did in Nova Scotia, the light not gone yet but thinking about going. "I've been going over the timeline," he said. "In my head, on the train, trying to understand when it started." He stopped. "My mother died and I left. I was gone more than I was here, for 3 years, and the whole time." "You didn't know to look," she said. "And they would have been careful not to make it obvious. That is not particularly comforting." "No," she said. "It isn't meant to be. I'm just saying it's how it happens." He looked at her steadily then, in a way that felt different from the looking he'd been doing in the weeks since she arrived. More direct, more present. "Why did you look?" he asked. "You'd been here 2 weeks. 3, she said. "And I looked because I was taught to. My father kept accounts for 30 years and he told me that figures don't lie, but they do stay quiet unless someone asks them questions." "Your father taught you that?" "He didn't have a son," she said. "He taught me what he knew." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of something. "I didn't expect any of this," he said after a moment, and she understood he did not mean only the accounts. "Nor did I," she said. He looked down at the desk, at the notebook still open there, her columns and figures and underlined questions. He turned a few pages, not reading so much as looking, the way you look at something to understand what it cost. "The garden," he said. "You've been working in it every day. When it's dry enough. Douglas said you've got most of the south beds turned. The lavender will go back in before the frost comes properly. I want to see if it holds." He looked up. There was something careful and open in his face at the same time, which was a combination she hadn't seen before in a person's expression, and didn't quite know what to do with. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "This." He gestured between them, not dramatically, just a small motion of his hand. "I married you because my solicitor says I needed to put the estate's affairs in order, and a wife was part of that. That was a terrible reason. I knew it was a terrible reason when I did it. I married you because my family needed the arrangement to work, she said. I was not under any illusions either. No, he said, I don't think you were. She waited. I'd like to stay, he said, for a while here, not Edinburgh, here. He looked at the window, at the grey November light. If that's agreeable to you. She considered what was the true answer to that question. The herb beds need someone with better reach than me to do the back row, she said. If you're going to be underfoot, you might as well be useful. This time he did smile. It was not a large smile, but it reached his eyes. All right, he said. He did stay. Through the rest of November and into December. He was, as it turned out, not bad with the garden. He had watched his mother do it for years, and some of it had gone in. He learned what Louisa needed from him without her having to explain it more than once, which was a quality she had not anticipated and found she valued considerably. The Halifax solicitor filed the complaint and the investigation into Hardcastle, and Fenwick began in earnest. Hardcastle himself came back from wherever he had been in early December and attempted to characterize the discrepancies as accounting errors. The tenant records, laid out in the plain language of Pharaoh's receipts and the others, made this difficult to sustain. Mr. Graves wrote to Louisa that proceedings were underway and she should expect a full accounting by the new year. She read his letter at the desk in the library with Oliver reading something in the armchair by the fire, and she told him the news without looking up from the page. Good, he said, without looking up from his book. She almost smiled at that. It seemed enough. The lavender held. She had been uncertain it would, given the condition of the soil and the lateness of the season, but the plants that Douglas had transferred to the turned beds in mid-November showed no sign of failure. They sat quiet and low under the frost, and waited for spring. She checked on them every other day, not because there was anything to be done, but because it helped to see them still there. Oliver came out with her once, on a Sunday morning when the frost had lifted briefly, and the light was the clear pale gold of a Canadian winter. He stood beside her at the south bed and looked at the lavender plants in their rows. She used to cut them in late summer, he said. She'd hang them in the kitchen. The whole house smelled of it. Louisa looked at the plants. It will again, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I believe you, he said. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the garden, on the low gray plants that had survived longer than anyone had thought to care for them. But something in her chest had shifted its weight and was sitting differently than before, and she thought that was probably all right. She thought that was probably what had been supposed to happen, given enough patience and enough time, for both of them. She pulled on her gloves and went back to work.